This program is brought to you by Emory University.
This program is brought to you by the Emory University Center for Ethics.
So good evening and welcome to tonight's discussion, The Ethics of Inspiration, Honoring Ancestors and Influences, which is a conversation between David Harrington of the Kronos Quartet and John Fenn of the Library of Congress. And I'm John Lysaker, the director of the Center for Ethics, and we are very proud to host this event, which was defeated last year by that epic snowstorm that you don't remember, but it was epic. And we're very grateful that both John and David could reschedule and join us. Now, the center has a manifold mission, not unlike the Fox Center, whose director I'm very happy to see here, Carla. And that is to really generate program that stimulates thoughts and opens opportunities for reflection, which seems incredibly vital now, given what most people experience as dark days. Our center circulates through the whole of the university and beyond, leading to research, teaching, and programming in areas as diverse as healthcare ethics, matters of purpose, leadership, and philanthropy, Jewish ethics, the ethics of dialogue, questions of character and moral excellence, and ethics in the arts. But in each instance, a basic concern is to intensify conscientiousness such that those we engage leave us with a heightened sense of the challenge at hand and an improved feel for what is required to be better. And I say better because we are interested in growing a culture of moral ambition, as opposed to one of mere legal compliance or scornful judgment. And tonight's event is no exception. Collaboration is common across the arts, and inspiration comes to artists across cultural and historical traditions, identity markers, even art forms. This is straight from our dinner conversation, by the way, but I wrote it before. Those who endeavor to create know that the muses have lives of their own that cross borders with a dynamism that often takes our breath away. But that shouldn't prevent us from asking what is involved in doing that in a manner that is exemplary or acceptable or even unacceptable. Appropriation has become the term to mark the last option, and there is no doubt room for further discussions of the failures which that term indicates. But we also should be curious about what it means to carry out an inspiration or collaborate well. And we've invited David Harrington and John Fenn to help us enact that curiosity, first through a conversation between them, and then by way of questions from the in-person audience. So you should use the index cards that have been distributed to pose a question should you have one. Before the end of David and John's dialogue, we will signal you to pass your questions to the end of the aisle. And from that pile, we will select some for discussion. This allows us to identify questions of overlapping interest and introduce as many questions as possible. Before I introduce John Fenn, we have a busy September, and we're showing you on the screens lots of things that are happening, including following the Fox Center's book launch for Lynn Huffer, who's I'm happy to see here, an art installation of hers of collage that goes with the book in the bakery in town. So check out the websites, both of the Fox Center, our websites, and just see all the things we're trying to bring to you. But let me introduce John Fenn, and then I'll invite my colleague, Laura Emory, to introduce David Harrington. John Fenn is the head of research and programs at the American Folklife Center, a position that entails leading a team involved in public programming, publications, research, and training in the field of folk life. Trained in folklore and ethnomusicology, he earned a PhD from Indiana University. Prior to taking his position at the Library of Congress, John was an associate professor in the Arts and Administration program at the University of Oregon, and also a core faculty member in the folklore program, and also served on the executive advisory committee for the Oregon Folklife Network. He has conducted field work on expressive culture in Malawi and Southwest Africa, China, Indiana, and Oregon, exploring a wide range of practices, traditions, and communities, and is himself an inventive guitar player. Throughout his career, he has merged training in folklore and ethnomusicology with a commitment to documentation, public presentation, stewardship, and interpretation of cultural forms and expressions. That's what he sent me. I will add that beyond those admirable efforts, and I've known John for decades, he is among the most wonderfully generous and curious students and scholars and lovers and performers of music that I know. So please welcome him to Emory. Laura Emory, Associate Professor of Music, Editor-in-Chief of Music Theory Spectrum, and co-editor of the Contemporary Music Review, and a lot of other things. She's very busy. We'll now introduce David Harrington.
Thank you. Well, I guess my life would have been a lot easier had I just asked you to send me a bio. I spent all morning writing one. So here we go. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce David Harrington, violinist, founder, and artistic director of the Kronos Quartet. David formed Kronos Quartet in 1973 after hearing George Crumb's iconic response to the Vietnam War, Black Angels. This piece was unlike any music for the string quartet that David, or for any matter any of us, have ever heard. A piece for electric string quartet, full of strident, scratchy, and uncomfortable sounds. It was immediately clear to David that this was the kind of music that he wanted to play, not just by the sound of it, which, as he notes, merged the worlds of Hendrix, Schubert, Bartok in early music, but also by the political message that he carried, very much still relevant today. In an old TV interview, youthful Harrington stated, quote, "As a musician, you'd like to find the kind of music that is so powerful it can stop a bomb from falling or stop bullets from killing people." Well, I said youthful. Three main aspects of Kronos' output could be summarized as their political activism, their work with the so-called American minimalist composers, such as Terry Riley, Philip Glass, and Steve Reich, all of whom are turning 90 now or very soon, and their international repertoire. Active for over 50 years now, Kronos Quartet has commissioned over 1,100 works from artists around the globe. In lieu of performing standard classical repertoire, its absence is actually kind of a long-standing signature of Kronos. David decided early on that Kronos should commission new works. The first commission was by David's high school teacher, Ken Benshoff, for which they paid with a bag of donuts, is what I heard firsthand. Yes. Jean Renaud, who was the group's cellist for more than 2 decades, pointed out that around 1980, the ensemble collectively decided that they should stop playing pieces like Mozart or Beethoven quartets because there were a lot of ensembles that did them. And she says, quote, "They played them a lot better than we did. And we weren't terribly interested in it anyway." For David, this decision was brewing early on. He says, "We had a globe in our family home, and I realized that all the quartets I knew were written by 4 guys who lived in or near one city in Austria. Even back then, I found myself thinking, there's something missing here." The ensemble's most ambitious commissioning effort to date is the Kronos 50 for the Future project. Through this initiative, Kronos has commissioned and distributed online for free 50 new works for string quartet designed for students and emerging professionals, written by composers from around the world. Kronos has also mentored emerging musicians through workshops or extended residencies. If you're not familiar with this project, I urge you to visit the website. Before I met David, I was conversing with my colleague about Kronos' 1,100 commissions, and we were wondering who their amazing musicologist was. Certainly, Kronos had to have a full-time staff member who was tasked with finding these incredibly talented artists from around the world. When I asked David who this mystery person was, he simply pointed to himself. He noted, quote, "I find inspiration in the sounds of instruments and voices from every corner of the world. Stories of courage and determination in the face of nearly impossible forces, explorations of scientists and poets, the dedication of teachers and librarians, the hidden histories that reveal our true past, and the work that so many people do to make the world better." With David's vision, Kronos Quartet has broken the boundaries of what string quartets can do, as was noted by many critics, including New York Times. Radio host John Schaefer adds, Kronos has changed the way we think a string quartet can look, the way a string quartet can sound. It's not that big of a stretch to suggest the new music world falls into two eras, before Kronos and because Kronos. So please help me welcome David Harrington, an incredible musician, but also a visionary, an activist, and a community builder.
I think that set it up pretty well.
Whoa. I've got a lot to live up to.
I want to thank you all for coming tonight, and those of you who are online. I don't actually know where the camera is, but I guess it's somewhere in this room. So everyone here, everyone online, thanks for coming. I want to thank John and all the staff at the Emory Center for Ethics for putting this together, because I've been looking forward to it since the Great Ice Storm, and even before. David and I have been working together for 6 or 7 years, I think, in various ways, and we always have fun and exciting conversations, and I think this one will be no different, and you all get to be here. So we'll start with one question, David, and Kronos has collaborated with a stunning range of people and worked across an amazing and dynamic range of musical traditions. Just a couple of the examples, the album Ladolkan, which has you working with Malian traditions. Then there's Placeless, which merges the quartet with an Iranian vocalist and Persian poetry traditions. And then we have Tundra Songs, where you engage with Inuit throat singing traditions. Those are just 3 examples, and many more. But the question is, how or why did you and the quartet begin collaborating with performers and traditions outside the Euro-American avant-garde? And now that those collaborations are such a key component of what Kronos is about, how do you choose new collaborators?
You know, I follow my ears. I don't have any other choice, really. Laura mentioned Ken Benshoff, the composer that I studied with in high school, and in whose home I learned the very first new piece with a high school quartet I had. And it was a piano quintet that we played with Ken. And in that piano quintet, he quoted an American song, in quotes, Kisses Sweeter Than Wine. And first of all, the idea that I could be in the composer's house, and I got to have my first beer there when I was 16, much to my parents'
Formative.
Yeah, that was formative. And there's a song about wine and kisses and all this at age 16. That was really cool. And then by the time we actually premiered the work, and nobody in the audience had ever heard it. And so we had this background information. We put this piece together over about 3 months, and we got to present it. And it was so much fun. I got hooked right then. And, you know, mentioning the globe in my family home, fortunately, the high school I went to had a great music room with all kinds of recordings. And there was music from Ghana and from China and various places in South America. And also there was Standard Records and Hi-Fi, which was 2 blocks away from Roosevelt High School in Seattle. And fortunately, my the orchestra teacher, I got cut slips from physical education class virtually every day, and I end up down at the record store with Don Rizzo, a sax player, and so I got to learn about all kinds of stuff. And in those days, you could open the plastic on the LP, and they had listening rooms, And so for free, I got to check out all kinds of music. And then back in the music room in the high school, so it was there was just a lot of information from a lot of places. And so the idea that music is this living, magnetic kind of force was part of my life a lot. And then in 1973, in September, September 1st, as a matter of fact, we started Kronos. And by November, we had our first concert. And the music we played, in those days, it was pretty contemporary, really. Bartok's Third, Webern's Six Bagatelles, Stravinsky's Three Pieces, Hindemith's Third Quartet, and a piece by Ken Benshoff. And there were 9 people in the audience. 6 of them were my family. And Regan and I went home to our 1-room apartment with a Murphy bed. And I said, how was it? How was it? She said, oh, it was good. It was good. And she looks right at me. This is November 9th, 1973. And she said, where are the women composers? Could have dropped this cold water on my head at that moment. I did not know one single female composer, not one. So from that day, that became just learning about what was happening with more than 50% of the world's population so far as writing music. That became a really important aspect for me. And then going back to Roosevelt High School music room and hearing some of the music from various places in Africa, I realized, I've never heard my violin sound quite like what I'm hearing on these records. And so at age 16, 17, I realized there's a lot of things I'm going to need to learn to do. And the University of Washington at that point was a real center for ethnomusicology. And in the summers, years later, I realized, well, I did hear Hamza El-Din when I was about 17 years old. I did hear, excellent. Hamza was introduced to me in the 1980s by Terry Riley. I know, yeah. Hamza was very close friend. And I heard El Shankar and all kinds of musicians. And so anyway, the idea that your bow as a violinist, your bow can take you places. It's this way to travel to places you've never been to and make sounds you've never thought you could make. That became a really important aspect for me. And the other thing is having my own composition teacher, Ken Benshoff, as a close friend and loving to put music together with him. And the first piece he wrote for Kronos, which we premiered in spring of '74, also included Kisses Sweeter Than Wine, by the way. It's called Traveling Music. And the reason I'm here talking to you right now, I think, is because it was so beautiful to put that piece of music together with him. And it felt so empowering. And it's like each member of the group had a hand in making the notes. And that's something that for me is so beautiful about what I get to do. And the reason I get to do it is because I just decided as a young person, the world was going to have to get used to it. This is what I'm doing. And I was saying over dinner that, you know, I had the opportunity to speak to some young, absolutely virtuosic young players recently. And I just mentioned to them, you know, the world doesn't think it needs music. You're going to have to outsmart the world to bring music to the world. And anyway, that is something that I've felt involved with all these years.
One thing that strikes me as Laura was given the introduction, as you were just talking, David, is your ear drives you and your curiosity to know more about the musical traditions and the sources and the inspirations, but also to know the people you're working with, like working with living composers. And like you just said, bringing the music alive with them, not commissioning it and then having them give it to you and you learning it. That's not how Kronos operates. That's not what's driven so much of your collaborative work, right?
Yeah. I mean, um, the idea that the person most directly acquainted with an inspiration can be in the same room with you.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I've been really lucky, and Kronos has been very lucky to be in the same room and have someone like Astor Piazzolla
Mhm.
uh, and his great violinist Fernando Suarez Paz. Wow, what a high point! And you know, we went to Argentina, and I arranged to have a lesson with Fernando. And so I went over to Fernando's place. Fernando, how do you do these things? You know, how do you make this sound? And he said, he had a very low voice, and he said, David, you just do it. He goes, and later that very same night, Fernando's wife, whose name I'm spacing on right now, we were in Mrs. Piazzolla's home, and somehow after the night advanced quite a ways, uh, she was somehow teaching me how to do tango, which was a hopeless task, absolutely hopeless. And I'm looking over at Fernando, who's smoking on his cigarette, and I said, Fernando, why don't you show us how to tango? And like I said, he had a very low voice, and he said, David, violinists don't dance.
You laid down the law.
So
I mean, you're talking about luck, but there's also an intentionality too in where you've pushed things, right? I mean, even in responding to Regan's question in 1973, where are the women composers? That inspiration has pushed you, especially through 50 for the Future, to try to gather new compositional voices through the platform of Kronos, but also to provide those two emerging players, right? So you're merging your luck and your curiosity with like intentional kind of mission-driven.
well, for me, the way music works is really quite simple. And that is you hear something that somehow penetrates into your library, your inner library of sound. And the first string quartet that I ever heard, I was 12 years old. I had joined the Columbia Record Club. Those days you sent in a penny and you got to make some choices. And I happened to be reading a biography of Beethoven right at that point, and there was the mention of the late quartets. Well, I didn't know what a late quartet was, but this would have been 1961. The Budapest String Quartet had just released recordings of all the quartets, and the offering was Opus 127, the first of the late quartets. So I chose that. Okay. A couple weeks later, the LP arrives. I put on that first movement And that E flat major chord just wiped me out. That's all there is to it. I kept playing it over and over. And I can hear the sound of that chord right now. I carry it with me everywhere I go. And anything I've done since then is a variation of that chord. And for me, that sound is just something I love. The sound of two violins, a viola, and a cello. And what I've wanted to do is bring some of the rest of the world into this medium. And, you know, there was that moment of realization, like, oh, gee, all the quartet music I knew about was written by four guys who spoke the same language and had the same religion and lived in basically in the same city. And there's a lot of other cities in the world. There's a lot of other instruments and languages and religions. And so a lifetime of learning was upon me at that point. I'm sure I'm not answering your question.
No, you're leading into the next
Oh,
question in some
okay.
magical way.
Oh.
No, you're always answering them, David. So on that topic, when it comes to respecting, honoring, integrating other voices, sounds, traditions into your collaborations, do collaborations with musicians or composers from traditions and places outside of or long subjected to American and European colonization or structural exclusions pose challenges that do not arise when you work with someone like Michael Gordon or Terry Riley? Like, have you encountered challenges you weren't expecting in trying to be in this kind of space that you're creating with Kronos?
Yep. Can I tell you about, this is not quite a composer,
That's okay.
but so in 1992, Kronos released an album which is called Pieces of Africa. And a lot of people thought, you know, it was an album, that we made this album. Well, actually what happened was it took 8 years to assemble the music that eventually became that album. Okay, so we were doing a tour following the release of the album, and we were playing at Avery Fisher Hall. And who should be in the front row but Allen Ginsberg? Now, I don't know how that happened, but he was. And Dumasani Matairi was teaching the audience how to sing Kutambarara with us, which is the final track on the album. And so I'm aware that Ginsberg is singing with Kronos. And so anyway, after the show, I met Allen Ginsberg. And right at that point, I needed to plan a program for our debut in the big hall of Carnegie Hall. And it just occurred to me, I want to do Howl at Carnegie Hall with Allen Ginsberg. And there he was. And so I just asked him, and he said, well, I've never been to Carnegie Hall, but you know, it could be kind of interesting. I don't really do Howl very much, but I said, but wouldn't it be great to do this together? And anyway, so that happened. Okay. And I'm looking at, there was the thing about ancestors. Okay, so eventually we played with Ginsberg, did Howl. We found a composer, Lee Hyla, who was a total Ginsberg fan and knew all the extant live recordings of the poem. And he made a graph of the various timings. And you know, for a long poem, Ginsberg was always within about 20 seconds of the length. He was very consistent. And eventually, when we started rehearsing together, it was like having a great saxophone player. He was just so good, I thought. Of course, the people that agreed to this at Carnegie Hall, I don't think knew some of the words in that poem and some of the ideas and things. So we weren't asked back for a while, but that's life. But one thing that happened concerning ancestors, and I know that ancestors are a part of this. So I got to be in the conductor's room as my warm-up room. And I looked outside, and there's this little poster, framed poster, and I looked closely, and it was the debut of Jascha Heifetz at Carnegie Hall in 1917. Well, I grew up hearing from my grandmother. She had been at that concert. And she said she'd never heard a concert like that before. It just blew her mind. And so I grew up hearing about this concert. And right there was the poster. And so the librarian at Carnegie Hall eventually got us a copy for my family history. So now I have that poster in my family history. But anyway, my grandmother loved to hear violinists. I don't know why. She wasn't a violinist herself. And she heard Fritz Kreisler. And she heard Misha Elman. And she heard all kinds of violinists there. And anyway, I grew up hearing about that. So honoring that part of my own ancestry is important. And yeah.
It strikes me yet again that like the way you've approached collaboration and how that's been the ethos of Kronos for so long, even within the unit, is about sort of honoring the influences, but also the overlaps and the synchronicities and the, you know, happening to have Allen Ginsberg in the front and that leading to the next collaboration.
Yeah, well, I like to remain as limber as possible and just ready. You know, what might be able to happen next, we don't know, you know, and there might be somebody here tonight who can write the next great piece of music. I don't know. It might happen. And I mean, for me, music is so much about relationships and about conversations, especially during COVID. I must have had hundreds of conversations in Golden Gate Park, which is very near the Kronos office. And there's a place in the Stribing Arboretum. If you ever go to San Francisco, go to the Stribing Arboretum at Golden Gate Park. And it's a little fragrance garden, and kids love it. Kids my age love it. And anyway, I had all my meetings out there during COVID, and so many of the conversations had to do with what are we going to do? How are we going to? And I think that's about when I wrote to you.
Yeah, that's when we started having regular discussions.
And I thought, you know, I mean, there was an earlier time. This would have been in the early 80s when there was a fear that all the major cultural institutions in the United States were going to just fold. Orchestras gone, ballet, opera, all these kinds of things were just going to disappear. And I thought, shit, that means I'm never going to get to play The Rite of Spring by Stravinsky. that I have to play that piece. Well, I had a meeting in Golden Gate Park with a friend of mine who was a Stravinsky aficionado who knew every note. And I said, John, this is John Geist, John, you have to find a way of making a version of The Rite of Spring for Kronos. And so he did. So I got to play The Rite of Spring. And but then the topic came up, well, what happens if the audience wants an encore? What do you do after The Rite of Spring? So I had another conversation in Golden Gate Park with a friend named Steve Rifkin. And Steve was very connected to all kinds of vernacular music, and I said to him, I keep channeling Jimi Hendrix. I've been accused of a lot of things in my life, and one of them is subverting the string quartet by bringing Jimi Hendrix's music into it, which I totally disagree with. First of all, Regan, Hendrix is from Seattle.
Yeah.
Regan went to the same high school, Garfield High School, as Hendrix had a few years earlier. He's a hometown guy as far as I'm concerned. And anyway, I said to Steve, I think we should play Purple Haze. So a couple days later, Rifkin got us the parts, and we started playing Purple Haze. And so initially the idea was as an encore to the Rite of Spring. And I try to treat each concert opportunity as a moment to experiment, to make something that feels whole, where we can all learn new things. And years later, Conlon Nancarrow, the amazing American composer who fought in the Abraham Lincoln Brigade and during the Spanish Civil War, eventually moved to Mexico. And Kronos played the world premiere of his first string quartet, which nobody had played until the late 70s, I think, early 80s when we started playing. And then on our first record for Nonsuch, we recorded Conlon's first string quartet and included music of Philip Glass and Hendrix. And Nancarrow was so upset that his music was next to Philip Glass and on the same disc as Jimi Hendrix that he was going to be writing his string quartet #2 for us. But go into his catalog, there is no string quartet #2. He wrote string quartet #3 instead. Not for Kronos.
So that's the missing collaboration.
That's the missing collaboration. I love Nancarrow. I absolutely love him and his music, and but I mean, you have to deal with people sometimes that are very limited in what they think, where they think their music ought to be in our society, in our world. And I'm sure I'm not answering the question.
No, wrong again. um, Thinking about collaborations and challenging moments that either are positive or not so good, would you be able to reflect on a collaboration that helped you grow as a collaborator, that helped you learn something? I mean, again, recognizing Kronos has been a long arc of collaborations, but are there moments that stand out for you?
There are so many moments that stand out. And in fact, just last night in San Francisco, we were working with a marvelous force in life and music and invention, really. Her name is Victoria Shen. And she created these kind of fingernail styluses that have been used by many pop musicians. It was actually Victoria's idea. So when you see somebody playing an LP with a fingernail stylus, that came from Victoria Shen. Anyway, then she got the idea, well, I could put a stylus on a violin bow. And that started our collaboration with Victoria. And so last night we were kind of exploring that. And the LPs we used were, we selected some of our 50 for the Future recordings. And so we were playing them, ad-libbing various tracks all together, making a collage. And it was not a finished piece, but um, we're beginning to do these kinds of events where we can bring the audience into a process, because that's where we get energized to the point where we can then take something to make a concert, but it's in the rehearsal. It's in the kind of private moments. But if you can open up the private moments for an audience, then they can maybe get energized in the same way we can. I'm finding that's a really important thing right now for us. But getting back to pivotal moments, one of them was for sure was working with Laurie Anderson. And so we had recorded Landfall. It took 20 years, 20, for me to convince Laurie Anderson that she could write a string quartet. And here's how I did it. First of all, I went to every concert. She and Lou would be somewhere and Kronos was playing. I'd invite them and then we'd talk. Laurie, how's the string quartet coming? Oh, it's coming along. I've got an idea. 5 years later, I see her again. How's it coming? Oh, it's coming along. Okay. Eventually, she released a recording. And on that recording, there was this piece called Flow. And I called Laurie up and I said, Laurie, you've written the string quartet. I heard it just now. And would you mind if Kronos played that? And she says, no, that's fine. Great. Go ahead. And so we started playing Flow. And then she came into a concert and heard it. And then after that, Landfall began to happen. But it took 20 years. Okay. And then, so we all record the piece. It took Scott Fraser a year to mix the recording. He was so invested in every note of that piece. He drove all of us nuts. We missed so many deadlines. Anyway, so I'm over at Laurie's and we're just listening to the final mix. And she says to me, I don't know if we should release this.
Too soon?
I said, Laurie, this is really good. And now this is after Lou had died. Okay. Lou was at the first run through of Landfall. And we've finished. This is before it had a title and before the absolute sequence was totally figured out. And we finish. Lou calls out, Laurie, don't change an effing note of this piece. Okay. So here I am with Laurie 5, 6 years later. She's thinking, I don't know if I should. And so I just had to quote Lou. And she said, thank you. I forgot he said that.
I think perseverance is another ingredient in your collaborative.
Well, and it gets back to that E flat major chord, and when you think about other additions to that internal library, and I think everyone in this room, whether you know it or not, you have your library of favorite moments in music. I'm convinced it's part of being a human being. You just get to have that, and it's yours. Nobody else knows what it sounds like. You don't have to talk about it to anybody. It's yours. And for me, it takes a lot to get into that library. It takes a lot. I mean, there's just music all over the place, and some of it goes in one ear and out the other, and okay. But every once in a while, there's something. And I mean, I can tell you, for example, the recording that Lorenzo Dow Turner made,
Mhm.
and I'm forgetting her last name, Amelia.
Amelia's song.
Yes,
Yeah.
Amelia's song. But what's Amelia's last name? Why am I?
Might come to me.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I just think of it as Amelia's
Mhm.
song. And I heard this, and then I learned a little bit about the story. So Lorenzo Dow Turner, some of you already know, was the linguist that established that Gullah is a language. Well, in 1932, part of his research was recording various Gullah speakers. And so here he is recording, and I think it was in Georgia
Mhm.
somewhere.
Mhm.
Yeah. And he records Amelia singing the song. He didn't recognize the words. And she didn't know what the words meant. She learned the song from her mother, who learned it from her mother. Okay, then fast forward some 10 years or so, a linguist from Sierra Leone visits Lorenzo Dow Turner. Lorenzo plays the recording. You probably know this history better than I do, so if I get something wrong, just correct me. But and that linguist said, well, that's Mende language. But the linguist didn't know anything about how that song was used in the culture. And so fast forward another decade or so, and a sociologist and musicologist took the recording to Sierra Leone and eventually found someone that knew the song, was able to sing along with Amelia. And come to find out, it was a song sung by women for funerals, passed down by women in the family. And so we have this recording that is, to my knowledge, is the surviving recording in an African language in our culture.
Mhm. Recorded in the United States.
Recorded in the United States, yeah. And in 1932, and that song, and then everything that happened at the Library of Congress and the Folk Life Center to make the recording as well, just to clean it up and make it as 2025
As audible as
as
possible.
audible. And we got to Charlton Singleton wrote a marvelous piece that we played with Quentin Baxter in June, and it's forming the centerpiece of our triptych that we're working on. But now, how did I get talking about that?
I know, but that's what I want to talk about
Oh, okay.
next.
Oh, okay.
So you're
Okay.
again, you're leading me. Yeah. So really quickly, if you just want to talk about these commission pieces that you're working on to celebrate or to commemorate the 250th anniversary of the semi-quincentennial of the United States. Can you talk a bit about the triptych and the cultural history you're intending to share through performance and how you're collaborating with living composers to create these three pieces? And then we'll move into questions from the audience.
Well, just yesterday in San Francisco, the quartet had lunch with David Lay. David is a cultural historian, activist, and we were hearing stories about some of the early legal cases brought by Chinese Americans. So there's not only Wong Kim Ark, which is a very central case, but there's many other cases. And like David said to us yesterday, he said, you know, one thing about the Chinese community in the United States is they always hire the best lawyers. So they've been very successful as a community in helping formulate some of the important pivotal legal
moments, yeah,
legal
legal
movements.
established.
And what he said, and I was not expecting this, was he said the connections between the Chinese community, the indigenous American community, and the African American community is very important. And I said, well, somehow those communities were the ones that I kind of arrived at when I was asked by the program director at Carnegie Hall, how would Kronos like to, first of all, would Kronos want us mark the 250th year? I said, yes, we would. And then, what would you like to do? And this is 2 years ago.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, right about.
Which seems like a long time, right? Ago. And I said, well, I think we would do a triptych inspired by George Crumb's Black Angels, which itself is a triptych.
Mm-hmm.
And I think panel number 1 would be indigenous community. Panel number 2 would be African American, particularly Gullah related. Panel number 3 would be Chinese American. So I found out for sure yesterday that David Lay feels the connection.
This arc that goes across the whole.
And I wasn't expecting that. I did not know that.
And you're working with at least 3 different composers across those panels, right?
Yes, we are.
To drawing on archival materials, as well as the composer's own backgrounds, musical and otherwise.
Right. And I'm still trying to figure out what it's going to be and how, you know.
Well, you have some time, right?
I have a little time. Yeah. I mean, 6 months seems like a long time until you actually really look at the calendar. And it's
That sounds
6
too
months.
bad.
It's not a good idea, right? Yeah. Okay.
And so this is the to bring us full circle to collaboration. This is what you're working on right now. This is a big central element of the Kronos project, the Kronos mission, and this is what we've been talking about for a couple of years.
It is, yeah. And I mean, there are various elements. I want, for example, in each of the panels, there will be elements of our 50 for the Future project.
Mm-hmm.
There will be early recordings. Some of you know that the first Chinese music ever recorded in the United States was recorded in San Francisco in the early 20th century on Edison cylinders.
Yeah, right at the turn of the century.
And it's like, when you listen to those recordings and just try to imagine being an Anglo in San Francisco in 1902 or whatever and hearing Cantonese opera for the first time, that's a bigger moment than the Rite of Spring in Paris in 1913 or whatever it was. I mean, I could imagine it being so different than anything that the whites in San Francisco would have ever heard before. How do you recapture that? I don't know. We're working at it.
Well, I have great faith in you and Kronos and all of your collaborators to do it. I want to thank you for this conversation. We're going to move into questions from the audience now. So thanks, David. It's always a joy. Could have gone another couple hours. Who's going to be the voice of the questions?
I will be the voice of the
Okay.
questions. And I know certain people are still writing questions. So if you could, Mary Rachel and Jen, if you get them to them, then they'll get them to me. So first, thank you both. Here's one, and I'm going to not pronounce this very well. Alexander Vrebelov is the second most commissioned composer after Riley by Kronos, and certainly the most commissioned female composer. What draws you to her sound?
So here's what happened. In 1996, I got it was either a call or a note from a student at the San Francisco Conservatory named Alexandra Vrabelov. And there was something about the way she spoke about her music. And one thing I always do is I listen and observe how someone talks about their work. That's important to me. And so she was finishing up her, I think, master's degree or something at the conservatory, and eventually I heard some of her music, and basically we've been friends ever since. The thing about Alexandra is she's an explorer. She's listening. I found out that she actually makes paintings. What's that? That I don't know of. I'm not sure of that. But what she does is before she writes a note, she makes a painting, and sometimes numerous paintings. And you know, when you go back and look at the paintings after you hear the piece or after you receive the piece, it begins to, there's something, there's a visual element that, okay, and eventually she moved back to then Yugoslavia from San Francisco, and Kronos was playing over there, and you know, we've done a lot of things together. We went to the Tesla museum, and in her hometown of Novi Sad, we went to the synagogue late at night. We were let in by caretaker of this synagogue. These are the kind of things I would do with Alexander. And the thing about her is that I find totally amazing is just how she incorporates experiences she has into her life and into her music. I don't know that she was expecting to write a piece inspired by Yugoslavian gypsy violinists when she wrote Pannonia Boundless for us. But one thing that's great about her is the conversations we have. They always lead somewhere, and we're always talking about things we want to do or we've experienced and want to bring into our work. And right at that point, I was imagining part 2 of a triptych. So I'm seeing a connection here, triptychs. So, okay, so my son died in April of 1995. And that's when we were right in the middle, actually, of making a recording that eventually became known as early music. And after that came out, I realized I was in a record store in Budapest, and it was on a Sunday. And the music well, I should say Adam died on Easter Sunday, 1995. So a year later, I was in this record store, who should be on the coming out of the speakers but Billie Holiday singing Gloomy Sunday. And right at that, later that night, in the hotel I was staying at, there was this gypsy string orchestra playing the wildest, happiest music. And that's when I had this idea, okay, we got to make this album that goes from, you know, how notes can turn from being tragic to the opposite. Just almost like a watercolor in sound. So that eventually became part 2 of the triptych. And so I was explaining to Alexandra what I was hoping to accomplish. And then she wrote Pannonia Boundless. Yeah. And then eventually part 3 was Nuevo. And that Nuevo, and this is why when I hear talk of horrible things about Mexican culture coming from leaders in our society, I see red, because I took my family to Mexico that first Christmas in 1995 because I'd been there before and I'd felt the embrace of this culture, and I'd felt the way death was portrayed and felt and used, and it just seemed like a good place for us. And so I decided, all right, I want to make it. Part 3 of this triptych is going to be celebrating this. It's a little thank you note, actually. And I wanted, so we had to turn, at that time, Jennifer Culp was our cellist. We had to turn her into a tuba. We had to, we had to do a lot of things. And I'm not answering the question, I'm sure, but Alexandra Vrabeloff, she figures in all of these things. And I've had conversations with her about everything.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. So next question is, we live in a society that sees music as entertainment, but not as a living, energetic force that could stop a bomb. What do we need to understand or do to shift the current perspective to the more vital perspective?
Every time I hear that quote, you know, about trying to, first of all, I'm very proud of that. And I still agree with myself. I feel that it's up to musicians to make that music. We haven't done it yet. But I can imagine it, and I know it exists somewhere. And some of it might be access. It might be creating opportunities for people to hear things they've never heard before that might be able to become part of their inner world. Those notes that you just live for, and they resonate. If we can create enough of those, or enough opportunities for people, not that anybody's going to have the same one as I have or whatever, but enough opportunities for people to find those notes for themselves. And for me, that gets back to early education. It gets back to, you know, one thing I love to do is play in classrooms. That for me, I'd much rather play in my daughter's 3rd grade classroom than at Carnegie Hall. That's all there is to it. I would. And in fact, can I tell you a quick little story about it?
Please.
Okay, we were playing there, and my daughter Bonnie uses 50 for the Future in her classroom to teach music. Because in San Francisco, in 4th grade is when you can play an instrument in the public school. Well, 3rd grade, you have to make your decision which instrument. Okay. And so here we are, and she'd used Garth Knox's satellites. And so we get all set up, and I say, and we're gonna play Garth Knox's satellites. And the whole group, like 23 kids, jumps up, cheers Garth Knox's piece. We hadn't even played a note. And so here's how I know music education can work. Because these kids went nuts. And then they got to see it, and they were 2 feet away from us playing it. I called up Garth in Paris, and I said, Garth, have you ever got a standing ovation before anybody heard a note of your piece? He said, no. Well, it happened today. So music education works. It has to be done the right way. And the right way, as far as I'm concerned, is absolutely visceral and, touch the instrument,
Mhm.
it's like these old things are useful now. We don't need to, I remember playing in a refugee camp outside of Vienna, Austria. It was the oldest one. I think it was the oldest one in Europe, if I remember right. Still in existence, and we were playing there, and there were all these kids, and they were so into music. And we played this piece with Wu Man, and in this piece, I use this little violin that I picked up on that trip to Mexico, a little orange violin. Well, there's only 3 people that have ever played this orange violin. One is me, one is Noam Chomsky,
Of course.
and the third is this little boy at the refugee camp. And he wanted to take the violin. I wanted to give it to him. I really did, but I needed it the next night to play the piece. So anyway, that access to instruments, music is really important, I think.
There are a lot of really good questions here, and we're not going to get to them all. So don't take it personally, but you can still hate me. But there are a lot of really good questions.
I talk too long. That's the
No,
problem.
no, depth is always appreciated. So this is this idea that we create out of this internal library, and that we're really responding to things outside of us in making things. How does that impact at all a sense of what ownership might mean over artistic products? And can we unsettle the idea of the ownership of cultural goods if we continue with that metaphor? I think I'm getting the spirit of the question. Yes. Okay. It's a great one.
Yeah.
So what about ownership if things are circulating so promiscuously in the artistic sphere?
Immediately what comes to mind is wanting to tell a story. So at the 50th anniversary of the I Have a Dream speech, I happened to have had the TV on late at night, and I think it was on C-SPAN maybe. And Clarence Jones was being interviewed. Clarence was Martin Luther King Jr.'s speechwriter and lawyer. And he told the story of how the speech became the speech. And the night before, Martin Luther King calls him, Clarence, can you write out some thoughts for me? And which he did. Okay, the next day arrives, speech starts, and the first 8 or 9 paragraphs were pretty much, in fact, Clarence would say word for word what he had written. And then Martin Luther King veered towards some other things. And this was their process. And Clarence spoke and speaks of not really writing the words, but hearing Martin Luther King Jr.'s voice saying the words. And I've met a lot of composers that talk the same way about that. uh, Alfred Schnittke talked that way, that he didn't feel like he composed something. He felt like he revealed something. I've heard many other composers just say that, um, they hear something inside and then they transcribe it. Okay, so the speech is happening, as many of you know, on the rostrum was, um, among others, was Mahalia Jackson, who was Martin Luther King Jr.'s favorite singer. And in moments of need, he would call her and she would sing to him on the phone. If you can imagine that. Uh, uh, I get chills every time I think about Mahalia Jackson singing on the phone and just hearing that. Anyway, so she's on the stage and her close friend is speaking, and at a certain point, she calls out, "Martin, tell them about your dream. Tell them about your dream." That moment, now this is Clarence telling the story. That moment, he closes his book of notes, and that's when the speech went cosmic. And so I thought about this, and I thought, okay, that's what musicians can do. We can listen, and we can listen to our friends and our society, but especially our friends. And if they're not quite saying it the way we know they can say it, we can tell them. And that's what Mahalia Jackson did. And for me, that's a very pivotal moment in not only American history, but music history, listening. And so we had to have a piece. So I found out Clarence lives in Palo Alto, and we got him into a recording studio. And I was encouraging him to tell the story so that we could have a piece that included that story. And at the same time, you should know that it was Clarence Jones that got the letter from Birmingham jail out of jail. He's the one that put it in his pocket as Martin Luther King Jr.'s lawyer. We would not have that letter if it weren't for Clarence. So for me, I'm glad he received was it the Medal of Honor?
Freedom.
Medal of Freedom. Is that the same one it's been proposed that Giuliani get?
No comment.
No comment. Anyway, all I can say is I want. What are you laughing about?
So, have you turned down compositions and or projects, and why?
Yes. Most notably, one of the early ones, this would have been, oh man, early 80s. Kronos had never played in Chicago. And in those days, there was this, was it every year or every 2 years, New Music America. And it was in a different city. Okay. This year would have been in Chicago. And they asked Kronos to play 2 shows. Great. Make our Chicago debut, come out from San Francisco and all that. That was a big deal for us and a lot of money. And then the program director, who was also a writer for the Village Voice, music writer, asked if we would play music by a certain composer. And I said, well, could you send score and parts? And okay, so we took a look at it. It was horrible. So I called him up. Can't do it. Is there another piece? Did he write anything else? So we got a couple of other pieces. They were worse. And so I just said, we're not going to make our Chicago debut playing music by this guy. And okay, turns out that the composer's widow was funding our performance. I said, I'm sorry, can't do it. And for the next, it was until after Morton Feldman died. That's how I can tell you. And that particular reviewer wrote the most beautiful obituary about Morton, whom we knew very well, and I happened to meet him at a concert, and I said, Kyle, I loved what you wrote about Morton. Then we started getting good reviews from the Village Voice again. You know? Anyway, don't get me started about musical politics, okay? Because you got to stay away from them.
All right, I'm moving along. Then.
Okay.
So at one point you did talk a little bit about these live rehearsals, explorations you're currently doing, and about that as a collaboration with an audience. And one of the questions was about if you could say a little bit more about what it, as a, both either in the genesis of the performance you're crafting or the actual delivery of the performance, what that collaboration, what it's like to collaborate with an audience. And I want to add my own little inflection in this. And, can you think of there ways in which a performer in that collaboration can disrespect an audience? And what are some of the ways in which an audience, I think this is an easier one to answer, disrespect the performer? So if it ends up a kind of collaboration going on, are you willing to think about that? Does it make sense to talk about that as more or less respectful? And I think particularly, like, what do you think of as, you respecting the audience and what you expect back from the audience, if in fact it is a collaboration?
When I'm trying to put together a musical experience, whether it's a concert or like we did last night or a recording or anything, what I would do is use myself as the first guinea pig. Like, is this something I want to do and I want to present? So that's the first thing for me. And then an audience, I mean, for me, an audience is they pull the sound out of us, out of our instruments. They're absolutely critical. And when you're making a recording and there's no audience there, you have to imagine the microphones are a bunch of people with loads of ears, and that it's just pulling the sound out. Otherwise, it just doesn't work. I'm increasingly wanting to make experiences that I feel energize us. There's loads of problems we all have in the world. It's, we can go on about that for a long time. One thing musicians can do is energize us in music and cleanse, and some music can cleanse us, and some music can provide those sounds we were talking about earlier, internal sounds, reference points. Is that answering at all what you were? Because I really appreciate the depth of the question, and it might take me several hours to really answer.
No, yeah, I think that, it sounds like if the audience, the collaboration is its ability to pull sounds out of you,
Yeah.
and then shifts in the audience will probably pull out different sounds.
I've never felt disrespected by an audience. There is a moment I regret, really regret. And there was, we were playing a concert and this was in, a lot of things happened in the 80s,
It's a weird time.
Good.
We were playing in Santa Barbara and we were playing a Shostakovich quartet. And there was a woman sitting in the front row. And I remember, because in those days, the stage was kind of up. And so there was this woman right by me, actually. So here I'm sawing away, and there's this one. And she's opening a candy wrapper. And it's really loud. And I was listening, and, okay, that stopped for a while. And then it came back. Must have been another candy, I guess, right? At a certain point, I just jumped down from the stage. This only happened once. I've only done it once in my life. I totally regret it. I would never do it again. And I just whispered to her, I said, "You're going to have to stop doing that. It's driving me nuts." And I would much rather, at this point in my lifetime, be driven nuts by the candy wrapper than having said anything about it. And so I regret that.
Yeah, it sounds like you both could have done better there.
I think we both could have done better, but especially me.
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you both so much. This has really been amazing for us. So thank you. And thank you for the questions.
This program is brought to you by Emory University.
This program is brought to you by the Emory University Center for Ethics.